Sarah Chen had always been drawn to the broken things. Maybe it was her background as a trauma nurse, or perhaps something deeper that made her see potential where others saw only problems. When she walked into the Galactic Animal Shelter that Thursday morning, she wasn't looking for a pet. She was looking for something else entirely. The shelter buzzed with the usual chaos of interspecies adoption day. Families from across the galaxy browsed through climate-controlled habitats, cooing over fluffy Andromedan puppies and rainbow-scaled Proxima fish. The air hummed with universal translators working overtime, converting excited chatter into comprehensible speech. Sarah moved past the popular sections, ignoring the crowds gathered around the cute and cuddly. She'd learned long ago that the most interesting cases were always hidden in the back, forgotten, and overlooked. The isolation wing stood at the far end of the facility, separated by heavy blast doors and warning signs in 17 different languages. Sarah's universal translator helpfully informed her that most of them said some variation of dangerous animals, authorized personnel only. She smiled and flashed her volunteer badge to the nervous Rigelian guard. "You sure about this, human Sarah?" The guard's tentacles twitched anxiously. "Most volunteers don't come back here. These creatures are difficult." "Difficult how?" "Aggressive. Unpredictable. Some have hurt previous owners. Others—" He paused, consulting his datapad. "Others are just too strange. Too alien, even for us aliens." Sarah's interest peaked. She'd worked with difficult patients before. Humans who'd survived unthinkable trauma, soldiers broken by wars they couldn't forget, children who'd learned not to trust. Sometimes the most challenging cases taught you the most about compassion. The isolation wing felt different, quieter. The lighting was dimmer, the air recyclers working harder to manage the various atmospheric needs of the inhabitants. Sarah walked slowly down the corridor, reading the placards outside each habitat. Most of the creatures inside barely acknowledged her presence. A massive centaurian bear thing pressed against the far wall of its enclosure, massive shoulders heaving with each breath. A vegan crystal spider hung motionless in its web, occasionally flickering with dangerous energy. Predators and psychics and things that defied easy classification. Then she saw it. The habitat was smaller than the others, tucked into a corner where the overhead lighting cast strange shadows. The placard read, "Specimen 847B, Feliform, Planet Unknown, Extremely Dangerous, Do Not Approach." Below that, someone had scrawled in human English, "Devil Cat." Sarah peered through the reinforced viewing panel and saw what looked like the saddest creature in the galaxy. It was roughly cat-sized and cat-shaped, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its fur was a deep black that seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to focus on. 6 legs ended in what appeared to be metallic claws that sparked occasionally against the habitat floor. Most unsettling were its eyes, not 2 but 4, arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated skull. They glowed with an internal light that shifted between purple and green. The creature sat hunched in the corner, as far from the viewing panel as possible. It didn't move when Sarah approached, didn't even seem to notice her. But something in its posture spoke of defeat rather than defiance. "Poor thing," Sarah murmured, pressing her hand against the glass. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Sarah turned to find a tall Andromedian in a veterinarian's coat approaching. Dr. Kellex had the typical blue-gray skin and oversized head of his species, but his expression was unusually grim. "Dr. Kellex, right? I'm Sarah Chen. I volunteer here on weekends." "I know who you are. Human with the trauma medicine background. Look, I appreciate your work with our more challenging animals, but this one—" He gestured toward the habitat. "This one is different." "Different how?" Dr. Kellex pulled up a holographic display from his medical scanner. "We don't even know what planet it's from. A cargo ship found it drifting in an escape pod near the outer rim. No identification, no records in any database. It was barely alive when they brought it in 6 months ago. Sarah studied the medical readouts. The creature's biology was unlike anything she'd seen. These readings can't be right. Its cellular structure shows properties of both organic and synthetic materials. That's what makes it dangerous. Its claws can cut through most known materials. Its bite carries some kind of neurotoxin. And the psychic emanations... Dr. Kellix shuddered. 3 previous adopters returned it within days. All reported nightmares, feelings of dread, and in one case, complete paranoia. But it looks so sad. Sad things can still be dangerous, human Sarah. This creature has been through something traumatic, yes, but that trauma has made it unstable, unpredictable. Sarah looked back at the creature. It had moved slightly, lifting its quad-eyed head to watch their conversation. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw intelligence there. Not just animal awareness, but something deeper. Something that understood exactly what they were discussing. What happens to it if no one adopts it? Dr. Kellix's silence was answer enough. Sarah made her decision. I'll take it. Absolutely not. The liability alone. I'm a licensed trauma specialist. I've worked with dangerous patients before. And I have a private property outside the city with proper containment facilities. This last part was only partially true. She had the property, but the containment facilities consisted of her grandmother's old barn and a lot of hope. Dr. Kellix studied her for a long moment. You understand that if it hurts you, or escapes and hurts someone else, the shelter cannot be held responsible. I understand. And you understand that this creature may be fundamentally incompatible with human companionship. It may never trust you, never show affection, never be anything more than a dangerous wild animal. Sarah looked back at the creature. It was watching her now with all 4 eyes, and she could swear she saw something like hope flickering in that alien gaze. Some patients take longer to heal than others, she said quietly. The paperwork took 3 hours. Sarah had to provide references, undergo a psychological evaluation, submit to a background check, and sign more liability waivers than she'd seen in her entire medical career. Dr. Kellix tried to talk her out of it twice more, and the shelter director called her personally to make sure she understood what she was getting into. Finally, as the twin suns of the system began to set, Sarah found herself in the habitat with the creature that everyone called Devil Cat. It hadn't moved from its corner, but its 4 eyes tracked her every movement. Sarah sat down cross-legged about 6 feet away and simply waited. She'd learned patience in her work with trauma patients. Sometimes the best thing you could do was simply exist in someone's space without demanding anything from them. "Hey there," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. I know you've had a rough time. I know you're scared and probably angry and don't trust anyone. That's okay. You don't have to trust me. You just have to come home with me and we'll figure out the rest as we go." The creature tilted its head, those strange eyes focusing on her face. For a moment, Sarah felt a pressure against her mind, like someone very gently knocking on a door. She didn't resist it, didn't try to push back. She simply opened herself to whatever this creature wanted to share. Images flashed through her consciousness. A ship in space, explosions, fear, pain, being alone in the dark for what felt like forever, then the shelter, cage after cage, hands that prodded and poked, voices that spoke of her as a thing rather than a being. More fear, more pain, more loneliness. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, what did they do to you?" The creature made a sound, something between a purr and a mechanical whir. Slowly, carefully, it stood and took a single step toward her. "That's it," Sarah whispered. "That's good. You don't have to come closer if you don't want to. But I'm not going anywhere. Not until you're ready. They sat like that for another hour, the creature gradually moving closer until it was within arm's reach. Sarah didn't try to touch it, didn't make any sudden movements. She just talked in a quiet, steady voice about anything and everything. Her work at the hospital, her grandmother's farm where they'd be living, the chickens that would probably be very curious about a new housemate. When Dr. Kellix returned with the transport carrier, he stopped short. The creature was sitting less than 2 feet from Sarah, its quad-eyed gaze fixed on her face with something that looked almost like trust. "I've never seen it do that before," he admitted. Sarah corrected, somehow knowing this without being told. "Her name is Luna." "How do you know that?" Sarah smiled. "She told me." The transport to Sarah's farm took an hour through the winding roads outside New Geneva City. Luna rode in the carrier without complaint, though Sarah could feel waves of anxiety rolling off her. She kept up a steady stream of conversation, describing the places they passed and the home they were heading toward. Sarah's property sat on 100 acres of rolling hills and old-growth forest. The farmhouse had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who'd believed that everything deserved a chance at happiness. The barn stood behind the house, converted years ago into a workshop and storage space. Sarah carried Luna's carrier inside and set it down in what had once been a tack room. She'd spent the previous evening pet-proofing the space, removing anything that might be dangerous to a creature with metal claws and unknown dietary needs. "This is yours," she said, opening the carrier door. "You can come out when you're ready. There's water in that bowl, and Dr. Kellix sent some food that he thinks you'll like. The door stays open always. If you want to explore the rest of the barn, you can. If you want to stay in here, that's fine too." Luna crept out of the carrier and immediately pressed herself against the far wall, eyes darting around the new space. Sarah sat down in the doorway, close enough to talk but far enough away not to feel threatening. "I know it's scary," she said. "New places usually are, but this is different from the shelter. No one here will poke you or prod you or talk about you like you're not a person. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." As if to punctuate her words, a chicken wandered into the barn and clucked curiously at the newcomer. Luna's eyes went wide, all four focusing on the bird with laser intensity. Sarah held her breath, wondering if she was about to witness her first poultry casualty. Instead, Luna made that purring, whirring sound again, softer this time. The chicken, apparently unimpressed by the alien predator in its territory, pecked at some scattered feed and wandered back outside. "That's Henrietta," Sarah said with a grin. "She thinks she runs this place. The other chickens are Beatrice, Cordelia, and Ophelia." My grandmother had a thing for Shakespeare. Luna's quad-eyed gaze moved back to Sarah, and for a moment, she could have sworn the creature was amused. That night, Sarah set up a sleeping bag in the barn. Luna had retreated to her room when darkness fell, but she'd left the door open. Sarah could see her glowing eyes in the darkness, watching and waiting. "I used to camp out here when I was little," Sarah said into the darkness. "When things got scary at home, or when I just needed to think. Grandmother always said the barn had good energy. Said it was a place where broken things came to heal." A soft whirring sound from the darkness. Sarah smiled and settled deeper into her sleeping bag. She was right about that. She usually was. Sarah woke before dawn to find Luna sitting just outside her room, watching the sunrise through the barn's open doors. The alien's fur seemed to shimmer in the early light, the metallic threads woven through it catching and reflecting the colors of the sky. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah said softly. Luna turned to look at her, and Sarah felt that gentle pressure against her mind again. This time the images weren't of fear and pain. Instead, she saw the sunrise as Luna saw it, a symphony of light and color that human eyes couldn't fully appreciate. The alien's enhanced vision picked up spectrums and patterns that transformed the ordinary morning into something magical. "Wow," Sarah breathed. "Is that how you always see things?" A pulse of affirmation flowed through the connection. Then, hesitantly, Luna began to move closer. She stopped just out of reach, studying Sarah's face with those 4 glowing eyes. Very carefully, Sarah extended her hand, palm up. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "But if you want to—" Luna considered for a long moment. Then, with infinite caution, she reached out with one metallic claw and touched the tip to Sarah's palm. The contact sent a shock of sensation through both of them. Sarah felt Luna's surprise, her wonder at the warmth of human skin. And Luna, through the connection she'd initiated, felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Kindness. Genuine, unconditional kindness from someone who asked for nothing in return. For the first time since she'd been found drifting in space, Luna began to purr. 3 weeks into their life together, Sarah began to understand why Luna had been returned by previous adopters. It wasn't the physical dangers they'd warned her about. Luna's claws, while capable of cutting through metal, were carefully controlled. Her bite, despite the neurotoxin, had never been used aggressively. The real challenge was far more subtle and infinitely more complex. Luna was psychically active in ways that human science barely comprehended. Sarah first noticed it during her morning routine. She'd wake up already knowing that Henrietta had laid an egg behind the feed bins, or that storm clouds were gathering on the horizon hours before they appeared. At first, she attributed it to coincidence or her own observational skills. But as the incidents multiplied, she realized something extraordinary was happening. Luna was sharing her perceptions. The alien's enhanced senses picked up details that human awareness couldn't process. Through their growing connection, Sarah began experiencing the world through Luna's quad-faceted vision. She could smell the ozone building before thunderstorms, hear the ultrasonic communications of bats in the forest, and sense the electromagnetic signatures of approaching vehicles long before they came into view. But it wasn't just sensory enhancement. Luna's mind worked differently from any terrestrial creature. Where human thought followed linear patterns, Luna's consciousness seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She could process dozens of probability streams, calculating potential outcomes with an accuracy that seemed almost prophetic. Sarah discovered this ability quite by accident when she was planning a trip to town for supplies. She'd made a mental list of everything she needed. But as she reached for her keys, Luna appeared in the doorway and made a specific series of sounds, almost like musical notes. The impulse to delay her trip came from nowhere. Sarah found herself deciding to wait until afternoon instead, though she couldn't explain why. When the morning news reported a massive traffic accident that had closed the main highway at exactly the time she would have been traveling, she stared at Luna with new understanding. "You knew," she whispered. Luna's 4 eyes focused on her with what could only be described as satisfaction. The psychic connection between them pulsed with confirmation, and for the first time, Sarah began to grasp the true scope of what she'd brought home. Luna wasn't just an abandoned alien pet. She was something far more sophisticated, far more aware than anyone at the shelter had realized. The trauma that had left her broken and fearful had also left her abilities unstable, unpredictable. Previous owners had experienced the negative manifestations. Nightmares born from her unprocessed memories, anxiety that bled through the psychic link, moments of disorientation when her perception of multiple timelines created confusion. But with Sarah, something different was happening. The nurse's training in trauma recovery, her natural empathy, and her genuine care for Luna's well-being had created the perfect conditions for healing. As Luna learned to trust again, her abilities were stabilizing. The chaotic psychic emanations were organizing themselves into something more controlled, more purposeful. Sarah began to document the changes in a private journal. partly out of scientific curiosity and partly because she suspected no one would believe her without evidence. Week 4 brought the first major test of their developing bond. Sarah woke one morning to find Luna pacing frantically around the barn, all 6 legs moving in an agitated rhythm that spoke of extreme distress. The alien's usual purring whir had been replaced by a high-pitched keening that made Sarah's teeth ache. "What's wrong, girl? What's got you so upset?" Luna's response was a blast of images and sensations that nearly knocked Sarah to her knees. Ships in space, military vessels, search patterns, and underneath it all, a growing sense of danger approaching from the stars. Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed what Luna was trying to tell her. Someone was coming. Someone who had been looking for Luna for a very long time. The first sign appeared 3 days later. Sarah was in town picking up supplies when every electronic device in New Geneva City suddenly went silent for exactly 37 seconds. Traffic lights died. Vehicles stopped. Personal communicators ceased functioning. Even the cybernetic implants worn by several alien residents powered down completely. Then, just as suddenly, everything came back online. The official explanation blamed a solar flare, but Sarah knew better. She'd felt Luna's terror spike at the exact moment the blackout occurred, felt her alien companion's recognition of a technology she feared above all others. That night, Luna refused to stay in the barn. Instead, she insisted on sleeping in Sarah's bedroom, positioning herself by the window where she could watch the sky. Her 4 eyes never closed, and the low-level psychic emanations coming off her felt like a constant warning alarm. "It's them, isn't it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Whoever hurt you before, they're looking for you." Luna's confirmation came with a flood of new images. A laboratory hidden in the depths of a massive starship. Cages filled with creatures from across the galaxy, all of them showing signs of genetic modification. Scientists in environmental suits taking samples, running tests, pushing the boundaries of what living beings could endure. And Luna, younger and different somehow, connected to machines that hummed with power she couldn't understand. Sarah felt sick as the full picture emerged. Luna hadn't been a pet who'd been abandoned. She'd been a test subject who'd escaped. The psychic abilities, the enhanced senses, the strange fusion of organic and synthetic components in her biology, all of it was the result of illegal experimentation. The escape had been accidental, a side effect of an experiment gone wrong that had allowed Luna to break free during a transport. She'd stolen an escape pod and fled into space, but her captors had never stopped looking for their most valuable specimen. Now they'd found her trail. The second sign came a week later when Dr. Kellix called with disturbing news. "Someone's been asking questions about specimen 847B," he said without preamble. "Official inquiries. They claim to be her original owners, showing up with documentation that looks legitimate but feels wrong." Sarah's hands tightened on her communicator. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. Yet. But they're persistent and they have lawyers. Good ones. The kind that make shelter administrators nervous about liability and lawsuits. Can you stall them? Maybe for a few days. But Sarah, if they can prove ownership..." He trailed off, the implication clear. If Luna's captors could establish legal claim to her, there would be nothing Sarah could do to stop them from taking her back. That evening, Sarah sat in the barn with Luna pressed against her side, both of them staring out at the star-filled sky. The alien psychic emanations had stabilized into something like grim determination. She'd shared more of her memories with Sarah over the past few days, painting a picture of the horrors that awaited her if she was recaptured. "We won't let that happen," Sarah said firmly. "Whatever it takes, we'll figure this out." Luna made a soft sound that might have been gratitude. But Sarah could feel the doubt flowing through their connection. Luna had lived through capture once. She knew the resources and determination of her pursuers. How could one human, no matter how well-intentioned, stand against the kind of power that had created her? Sarah was wondering the same thing when her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with strength, Sarah Bear. Sometimes you win by being too stubborn to quit and too creative for them to predict. The plan began forming in Sarah's mind as she watched the stars. It was risky, probably impossible, and definitely illegal, but it might be their only chance. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sarah was feeding the chickens when a sleek atmospheric vehicle descended from the sky and landed in her front yard. The design was unfamiliar but clearly alien, all smooth curves and metallic surfaces that seemed to shift color in the morning light. When the hatch opened, 3 figures emerged. The leader was humanoid but clearly not human. Tall and thin with pale blue skin and eyes that were too large for his angular face. His 2 companions were heavily built and moved with the fluid grace of professional soldiers. Luna's warning had given Sarah just enough time to enact the first part of her plan. By the time the visitors reached her front door, the alien was safely hidden in the specially prepared root cellar beneath the barn, surrounded by electromagnetic shielding that would block most scanning equipment. Ms. Chen, the blue-skinned alien spoke perfect English with only the faintest accent. My name is Director Voss. I represent the Galactic Biological Research Consortium. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Sarah kept her expression carefully neutral. I'm not sure what you mean. Director Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his oversized eyes. Please don't insult our intelligence. We know you adopted specimen 847B from the local shelter. We have documentation proving our ownership of the creature. He gestured to one of his companions, who produced a data pad displaying what appeared to be official paperwork. Sarah glanced at it briefly, noting the impressive holographic seals and multi-species signatures. This says you own something called specimen 847B, she said carefully. I adopted a cat named Luna. The creature's current designation is irrelevant. It is our property. Created in our laboratories using our technology and our resources, we've come to reclaim it. Sarah felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. Funny thing about property. Last I checked, sentient beings couldn't be owned. And Luna is definitely sentient. Director Voss's smile became predatory. Can you prove sentience? Has the creature demonstrated language acquisition, tool use, abstract reasoning? Because our records clearly show it to be a sophisticated but ultimately non-sapient biological construct. The careful phrasing told Sarah everything she needed to know. These people had deliberately designed their experiments to create beings that could be classified as property, rather than persons. Luna's enhanced abilities came with a terrible price. Her legal status was that of an object, not an individual. I'd like to see a warrant, Sarah said. This isn't a legal matter, Miss Chen. This is a recovery of stolen property. We're prepared to compensate you for any expenses you've incurred, but the creature comes with us today. One of the soldiers moved casually toward the barn, and Sarah stepped into his path. I think you should leave now. Director Voss's expression hardened. Ms. Chen, you're interfering with legitimate business activities. I strongly advise you to reconsider your position. And I strongly advise you to get off my property before I call the authorities. The authorities have no jurisdiction over interstellar biological research. The creature is our property under both galactic commerce law and the Sentient Rights Convention. You have no legal standing to refuse our claim. The soldier had continued moving toward the barn despite Sarah's objection. She turned to follow him, her heart pounding as she realized how thin her defenses really were. That's when Luna's first gift to humanity revealed itself. The soldier stopped suddenly, his hand moving to his head as if in pain. Director Voss frowned and took a step forward, then stumbled as his own expression went blank. The second soldier made it 3 more steps before he too stopped moving, his eyes unfocused and staring. Sarah felt the psychic emanation rolling out from the hidden cellar like a wave. It wasn't directed at her. Luna had learned to shield their connection from unwanted intrusions, but the 3 intruders were experiencing the full force of Luna's defensive capabilities. They stood frozen for nearly a minute, their faces cycling through expressions of confusion, fear, and something that might have been recognition. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the effect ceased. Director Voss staggered, his pale blue skin now several shades lighter. The soldiers moved to flank him, but their earlier confidence was gone. All 3 kept glancing around nervously, as if expecting attack from an unseen enemy. "What did you do?" Voss demanded, though his voice lacked its previous authority. "I didn't do anything," Sarah said truthfully. "Maybe your property has developed a few new tricks since you last saw her." The implications hit Voss immediately. His eyes widened as he realized what the psychic emanation meant. Luna's abilities had grown far beyond what they'd originally engineered. She was no longer just an enhanced test subject. She'd become something entirely new, something valuable beyond measure. "This changes nothing," he said, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "The creature still belongs to us." "Actually, I think it changes everything." Sarah pulled out her communicator and activated the recording function. "Because I've been documenting Luna's development since she came to live with me. Her language acquisition, her problem-solving abilities, her emotional responses, all the things that prove sentience under galactic law." It was a bluff, but it worked. Voss's expression shifted from anger to calculation. If Luna could be proven sentient, the legal landscape would change dramatically. Ownership of sentient beings was illegal throughout most of the galaxy, regardless of how they'd been created. "We'll be back," Voss said finally. "With proper authorization and a full recovery team. Enjoy your pet while you can, Ms. Chen. It won't be for much longer." The 3 aliens retreated to their ship, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. They'd return with more people, better equipment, and probably authorization from authorities that wouldn't care about legal niceties. As the ship disappeared into the sky, Sarah made her way to the barn and opened the hidden entrance to the cellar. Luna emerged looking exhausted but determined. The psychic defense she'd mounted had drained her considerably, but it had also proven something important. She was far more powerful than anyone had realized, and that power was growing. "We need help," Sarah told her quietly. "More help than I can provide alone." Luna's 4 eyes focused on her with understanding. Through their connection, Sarah felt the aliens' agreement and something else, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Luna had spent months hiding from her past, trying to heal from trauma that had nearly destroyed her. But now her captors had found her, and hiding was no longer an option. It was time to fight back. But first, they needed allies, and Sarah knew exactly where to find them. Sarah had always believed that humans were at their best when faced with impossible odds. It was something about their species that other aliens found both admirable and terrifying, the tendency to look at insurmountable challenges and respond with stubborn determination rather than logical surrender. She was about to put that theory to the ultimate test. Her first call was to her brother Marcus, an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate malfeasance. The second was to Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist who'd been fighting for expanded sentient rights legislation for over a decade. The third was to Captain James Harrison, a retired military officer who now ran a private security firm specializing in protection for at-risk aliens. Within 6 hours, Sarah's farmhouse had become the headquarters for what Marcus cheerfully dubbed Operation Stubborn Human. "So let me understand this correctly," Dr. Vasquez said, studying the scans Sarah had taken of Luna over the past month. You've been living with what amounts to a psychic weapon system that was engineered by illegal researchers, and your solution is to document her sentience and fight a galactic corporation in court. That's the plan, Sarah confirmed. It's insane, Captain Harrison added, though he was smiling as he said it. I like it. Marcus was already working his contacts, trying to track down information about the Galactic Biological Research Consortium. What he found wasn't encouraging. They're big, he reported. Really big. Connections to some of the most powerful governments in the galaxy. They have research facilities in 14 different systems and legal teams that could bury a small planet in paperwork. But, Sarah prompted, hearing something in her brother's voice. But they also have enemies, lots of them. Other research organizations, rights groups, politicians who've been trying to shut them down for years. If we can prove they've been conducting illegal sentience experiments, we could bring down their entire operation, Dr. Vasquez finished. Not just save Luna, but expose everything they've been doing. Luna had been listening to the conversation from her spot near the fireplace. Now she stood and moved to the center of the room, all four eyes focusing on each human in turn. The psychic pressure that built in the air was different from her earlier defensive display. This was controlled, precise, and entirely voluntary. Images flowed into their minds, not the chaotic flood of memory and emotion she'd shared with Sarah, but organized information presented with clinical precision. Luna was showing them exactly what the consortium had done, not just to her, but to dozens of other creatures over the years. The humans watched in growing horror as Luna shared memories of the research facility. Laboratories where beings from across the galaxy were subjected to genetic modification, cybernetic enhancement, and psychological conditioning. Creatures that had been deliberately engineered to exist in legal gray areas, intelligent enough to be useful, but not officially sentient enough to have rights. When the sharing ended, the room was silent, except for Dr. Vasquez's quiet weeping. "Dear God," she whispered. "How many others are there?" Luna's response came as a pulse of certainty. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all trapped in a system that treated them as valuable objects rather than living beings. "Right," Captain Harrison said grimly. "Change of plans. We're not just fighting to protect Luna anymore. We're going to war." The next 72 hours became a blur of activity that would later be studied in both military academies and business schools, as an example of how a small, determined group could challenge seemingly impossible odds. Marcus used his journalistic credentials to contact every rights organization, whistleblower group, and sympathetic politician in known space. The story of Luna's situation, backed by the psychic evidence she'd provided, spread through activist networks faster than the consortium could suppress it. Dr. Vasquez worked with xenobiologists from 17 different universities to create an official sentience evaluation protocol. Luna submitted to hours of testing, demonstrating not only intelligence but creativity, empathy, and abstract reasoning that exceeded the standards for legal personhood by substantial margins. Captain Harrison, meanwhile, had reached out to his old military contacts and discovered something interesting. Several governments had been investigating the consortium for years, suspecting them of creating weapons disguised as research projects. They'd been looking for evidence that would justify military action. Luna was that evidence. But the consortium wasn't passive during this period. Director Voss returned twice more, each time with more people and better equipment. On his second visit, he brought portable scanners that could detect psychic emanations through most conventional shielding. On his third, he arrived with a court order from a consortium-friendly magistrate declaring Luna to be reclaimed property. Sarah met them at her front gate with a small army of her own. The media attention Marcus had generated had attracted supporters from across the system. Alien rights activists, human volunteers, and representatives from several species that had suffered under consortium experimentation formed a protective barrier around the farm. When Voss tried to present his court order, He found himself facing not just Sarah, but cameras from a dozen news organizations and legal observers from multiple galactic jurisdictions. "You can't stop us indefinitely," he warned. "The creature belongs to us." "Luna belongs to herself," Sarah replied firmly, "and she's chosen to stay here." As if summoned by her words, Luna appeared in the farmhouse doorway. Over the past weeks, her appearance had continued to evolve. The metallic threads in her fur now formed complex patterns that seemed to shift and change based on her emotional state. Her four eyes had developed an inner luminescence that made them visible even in daylight. Most dramatically, her size had increased. She now stood nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder, her 6 legs carrying her with a grace that spoke of perfect balance and controlled power. She was, quite simply, magnificent. Luna walked calmly through the crowd of supporters, ignoring the cameras and legal documents and various officials trying to assert authority over her fate. She stopped directly in front of Director Voss and fixed all 4 eyes on his face. What happened next would be debated for years afterward. Voss went rigid, his pale blue skin darkening to almost purple. His eyes rolled back, showing only white, and his mouth opened in a silent scream. The 2 soldiers flanking him stepped forward to help, then stopped as Luna's gaze shifted to include them. For 30 seconds, the 3 consortium representatives stood frozen, while Luna shared with them exactly what their organization had done to her and hundreds of others. Not just the memories of pain and fear, but the deeper understanding of what it meant to be treated as an object rather than a person. The psychological devastation of being denied basic dignity and self-determination. When it ended, Director Voss collapsed to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his alien face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I thought you were just... I didn't know you could feel..." The crowd watched in stunned silence as one of the soldiers removed his weapon and placed it on the ground. Then the other did the same. Both knelt beside their director, their own faces showing the kind of emotional devastation that comes from truly understanding the magnitude of your own actions. Luna had done more than defend herself. She'd forced her captors to experience empathy for their victims, and the weight of that understanding was crushing them. "The others," Voss managed to say, "all the others still in the facilities. We have to help them." Sarah knelt beside the broken alien, her nurse's training overriding her anger. "That's what we're trying to do. Will you help us?" Voss nodded frantically. "Yes, anything. The access codes, the facility locations, the research data, whatever you need." Within hours, the information Voss provided was being transmitted to military forces across the galaxy. The consortium had research facilities in dozens of systems, many of them operating in violation of local laws and international treaties. Now, for the first time, authorities had the evidence they needed to act. The raids began simultaneously across 14 star systems. Military forces, backed by court orders and public outrage, stormed consortium facilities and freed hundreds of illegally modified beings. The evidence they found painted a picture of systematic abuse that shocked even hardened investigators. But the most important discovery came from the main research station in the Vega system. Captain Harrison, now working with a joint military task force, led the assault team that breached the primary laboratory. What they found there defied their worst expectations, not just individual test subjects, but an entire ecosystem of modified beings that had been bred and trained for a specific purpose. The consortium hadn't just been conducting illegal research, they'd been building an army. Luna's psychic abilities weren't a side effect of their experiments, they were the goal. The consortium had been creating telepathic soldiers that could influence enemy minds, gather intelligence through psychic contact, and coordinate attacks across vast distances. Luna had been their prototype, their proof of concept for a new generation of warfare. The implications were staggering. If the consortium had succeeded in mass-producing psychic soldiers, they could have dominated galactic politics for centuries. The beings they'd created would have been powerful enough to control governments, manipulate populations, and reshape civilization according to their creators' desires. Instead, their prototype had escaped, found healing through the kindness of a human nurse, and turned their own weapon against them. The final battle didn't happen in space or on some distant battlefield. It happened in a courtroom on Earth where Luna herself testified about her experiences and her nature. The legal proceedings were unlike anything in galactic history. For the first time, a being created through genetic modification was arguing for her own personhood, backed by mountains of evidence and the support of multiple governments. Luna took the stand using a specially designed translation interface that could convert her psychic communications into speech. She spoke clearly and eloquently about her memories of the laboratory, her escape, and her life with Sarah. She demonstrated her intelligence through complex problem-solving tests and showed her emotional depth by sharing her feelings about freedom and friendship. When the opposing lawyer suggested that her abilities made her too dangerous to exist freely in society, Luna's response became legendary. "Humans also have abilities that can be dangerous," she said through the translator. "They can create weapons, manipulate others, and cause great harm. But you don't declare them non-persons because of this potential. You judge them by their choices and their actions. I choose to use my abilities to help others, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to build connections rather than cause division. If that is not enough to prove my worth as a person, then perhaps the problem is not with me, but with your definition of personhood." The court's decision was unanimous. Luna was declared a free sentient being with all rights and protections under galactic law. More importantly, the precedent extended to all the other modified beings rescued from consortium facilities. Hundreds of creatures who had been considered property were officially recognized as people. The aftermath changed everything. The Galactic Biological Research Consortium was disbanded, its leaders facing trial for crimes against sentience. Director Voss, his worldview shattered by Luna's empathy-forced revelation, became a key witness for the prosecution and later established a foundation dedicated to helping recovered test subjects integrate into galactic society. The rescued beings, freed from their cages and legal limbo, began finding their own paths in the galaxy. Some chose to work with authorities to track down other illegal research operations. Others focused on healing and building normal lives. A few, inspired by Luna's example, became advocates for expanding sentient rights protections. And Luna herself? She chose to stay with Sarah on the farm outside New Geneva City. The barn was expanded into a proper residence with accommodations for her unique physiology, and the property became an unofficial sanctuary for other rescued beings who needed time to heal. But that was just the beginning of Luna's impact on human-alien relations. Her psychic abilities, stabilized through her bond with Sarah and her emotional healing, proved to be incredibly useful in peaceful applications. She could facilitate communication between species that had never been able to understand each other, help diplomats navigate complex negotiations by sharing emotional contexts, and even assist in medical treatments by providing detailed internal scans of alien physiology. More importantly, her story had inspired humans across the galaxy to look beyond surface differences and see the person inside even the strangest alien form. Adoption rates at alien shelters skyrocketed. Cross-species friendships became common. The idea that beings could be judged by their actions rather than their origins spread from system to system. One evening, 3 months after the trial, Sarah sat on her front porch watching Luna play with a group of newly arrived refugees from the consortium facilities. A small crystalline being that communicated through light patterns was teaching Luna a game that involved creating complex geometric shapes in the air. A furry creature from the Centauri system was offering commentary through musical tones that Luna translated for the others. Dr. Vasquez, now serving as the director of the new Galactic Sentience Protection Agency, found Sarah there. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Just thinking about how it all started," Sarah said. "I went to the shelter looking for a pet. Instead, I found a revolution." "You found a person who needed help," Elena corrected. Everything else followed from that. They watched as Luna successfully completed the light pattern game and began teaching it to a newly arrived refugee who'd been too traumatized to interact with anyone until now. "She's remarkable," Elena continued. "The psychic abilities, the intelligence, the emotional resilience. The consortium created something far beyond their understanding." "No," Sarah said softly. "The consortium created a weapon. Luna became remarkable in spite of what they did to her, not because of it. She chose to heal instead of seeking revenge. She chose to build bridges instead of walls. She chose to trust again after being betrayed." As if sensing the conversation about her, Luna looked over and made her purring whir sound that Sarah had learned meant contentment. Through their psychic connection, Sarah felt a pulse of pure gratitude and affection. The message was clear. "Thank you for seeing me as more than my scars. Thank you for believing I could be better than what they made me." Sarah smiled and sent back her own message. "Thank you for teaching us that sometimes the best way to change the galaxy is simply to refuse to let trauma define you." That night, as Sarah was settling into bed, she heard a soft scratching at her bedroom door. She opened it to find Luna sitting in the hallway with something in her mouth, a small device that pulsed with gentle light. "What's that, girl?" Luna dropped the device at Sarah's feet and activated her translator interface. "I've been working on something," her synthesized voice said. "A communication device that can bridge psychic and verbal species. I want to give them to all the diplomatic corps, help them understand each other better." Sarah picked up the device, marveling at the intricate construction. Luna had not only designed it, but built it using her metallic claws and some kind of innate understanding of technology that her creators had never documented. "This is incredible! How did you learn to build something like this?" Luna's 4 eyes sparkled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement. "You humans aren't the only species that gets stubborn when faced with impossible problems. I decided that if the galaxy is going to change, I should help it along." Sarah laughed and scratched behind Luna's ears, careful to avoid the sensitive spots where her cybernetic implants interfaced with her nervous system. "You know what this means, don't you? If this works, if you can help species understand each other better, you'll have done something that diplomats and politicians have been trying to accomplish for centuries." "We'll have done something," Luna corrected. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't seen past what everyone else was afraid of." As they settled in for the night, Sarah reflected on the truth of that statement. Luna's transformation from terrified shelter animal to galactic peacemaker hadn't happened because of any special human insight or superior compassion. It had happened because Sarah had done something very simple and very human. She'd seen someone in pain and decided to help, without worrying about the cost or the consequences. Sometimes the most profound changes in the universe started with the smallest acts of kindness. Sometimes saving the galaxy was as simple as taking home the pet that no one else wanted. And sometimes the most despised creature in the shelter turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed. 6 months later, Luna's communication devices were standard equipment for diplomatic missions throughout known space. First contact protocols now included psychic sensitivity training. The Galactic Sentience Protection Agency had grown into one of the most powerful institutions in the galaxy, with Luna serving as its chief consultant and Sarah as its human liaison. The farm outside New Geneva City had become a pilgrimage site for beings from across the galaxy who wanted to meet the alien who'd changed everything and the human who'd believed in her when no one else would. But for Sarah and Luna, the most important changes were much simpler. Trust had replaced fear. Love had overcome trauma. And every morning, when they watched the sun rise together, they were reminded that sometimes the most important victories happen not on battlefields or in courtrooms, but in the quiet moments when one being chooses to see another as worthy of care. The shelter's most despised alien cat had become the galaxy's greatest teacher of empathy. And it all started because a human nurse decided that everyone deserved a second chance.